On today's show, I'm breaking down the 5 biggest reasons that the Rangers went off the rails in 2024. All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into what went so wrong for these 2024 Rangers, this episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. Now, there were more than 5 things that went wrong for the Texas Rangers in 2024, especially compared to 2023. There's too many things to just name all of them. So I boiled it down to what I think are the 5 most important things that went wrong, the 5 biggest reasons why the Rangers are sitting here as I'm recording on the 2nd of October, and the Rangers are on the couches, unfortunately not participating in these playoffs. But let's start with the number 1 thing that went wrong for the Texas Rangers in 2024. I'm sure you can guess what it is. Shout it out if you're at home. That's right, class. It's the offense. The entire offense falling off of just a massive, massive cliff at basically every single position. From last year, one of the best offenses in all of baseball, definitely a top 3 offense, I would say. The Braves had one of the best offensive seasons we've ever seen, but the Rangers were so consistent, so threatening, so good at scoring runs. And this year, not so much. I mean, the drop-off from basically everyone was honestly shocking. It was flooring. It was truly difficult to do. Now, it makes sense that some of those guys last year in 2023 had career seasons. I mean, you need a few of those to win a World Series. You need some guys playing over their skates for a month or 2 or a season or what have you. Adolis Garcia probably isn't having a better year than 2023 ever again in his major league career, and that's fine. It was a great year. The Rangers needed that. I don't know if Jonah Heim is having another year like he had in 2023. That was a great year. He was an All-Star, a deserving All-Star. Mitch Garver had one of the best seasons of his career. Not quite the best, but an exceptional season. And, you know, the Rangers got great production from all kinds of different bench guys, from Ezekiel Duran playing out of his mind for the first half while Corey Seager was on the injured list. They got an incredible month in baseball from Evan Carter. They had the best season by far of Corey Seager's career. Not quite the best season of Marcus Semien's, but one of his best ones. And the fall off collectively everywhere is just insane to look at. I mean, last year, the Rangers as a team, had a 790 OPS. You know the number of players that have a 790 OPS or better this year on the Rangers? 1. Just the one. Just Corey Seager. That's the only one who did better than the Rangers did as a team last year. This year, their OPS was 686, a 104-point fall-off. Now, this is extreme. This is extreme across the board, and it paints it like it's just a Rangers problem. Now, granted, offense in baseball this year was down significantly than it was last year. So let's use some context. Let's use some league context. OPS Plus is a number I really, really like. It adjusts for what the league averages for park factors and things like that. It's a good kind of catch-all of, okay, how good was your offense relative to what was average in the league? And last year, the Rangers' 790 OPS was a 116 OPS Plus as a team. So the Rangers' average offense, their offense as a whole, was 16% better than the league average. This year, their OPS plus of 686 is 96 on the OPS plus scale, so 4% worse than league average. It's a 20% difference. It is still a massive, massive difference in terms of how well this offense compared to those around the league. Granted, their offense was down, but it was down by quite a bit more than, I think, pretty much almost any other offense outside of the Braves, and their fall-off had more to do with injuries than it did underperformance. But this Rangers offense, I mean, you go position by position. I mean, every position outside of two got significantly worse in terms of OPS plus. I wonder if you can guess the two. One position seems fairly obvious, as the Rangers' primary left fielder last year was Travis Jankowski, and the Rangers' primary left fielder this year was Wyatt Langford. One of the few places where the OPS plus jumped up, plus 18 points in terms of the OPS plus relative to league average, and the only OPS that was actually above, like a jumped up. 51-point jump in actual OPS, 18-point jump, in OPS plus. But everywhere else outside of first base, the only primary position where the OPS plus jumped up from where it was last year, that was Nathaniel Lowe, jumped up 4% better relative to league average, who I think people forget that Lowe actually did have a decent offensive season this year. I mean, not his best offensive season, could have had a few more home runs, but he was injured for the first time in his career, missed a month. It's easy to forget about how there were 17 games of Jared Walsh in there that had some moments, and some moments of those were good, and some were very much not so good, which is why Jared Walsh is not in the majors anymore, and Nathaniel Lowe still is. But the rest of this offense, I mean, the fall-off from Heim, just massive, massive fall-off. Big fall-off from Marcus Semien. Pretty sizable fall-off from Corey Seager, even if you throw out those first 30, 40 games or however many he played until he was actually fully right. Still not quite what he was doing last year when he finished runner-up in MVP. I mean, Smith had a fantastic first half. I mean, he was an all-star. He should have been an all-star. He had that level of production. He was the second best hitter on this Rangers team at the All-Star break. He might have even had a point to call him the Rangers' first best hitter at the All-Star break. But since then, he fell off. And the production they got out of Josh Young when he was healthy was not quite what they were hoping for. I mean, only 46 games from him there, an OPS plus that was above league average, but still not great. And the massive, massive fall off just everywhere, from Adolis Garcia, the Rangers' second best hitter last year, to one of their worst ones this year, and still getting a lot of plate appearances in the cleanup spot, but just not producing. There was a little bit of an uptick the last couple of months of the season to make you maybe a little bit optimistic about what he's going to do next year, but he's only getting a year older, and that fall off was massive. Same with Yogi Taveras. I mean, the Rangers are only really asking him and Heim to be league average hitters. The thing that made that offense so darn special last year is you had basically 7 guys that were, good hitters, like 10% better than league average hitters. Some of them were significantly better than that, but you had 7 guys in your lineup who were pretty good hitters. And then the other 2 were at least average in Leody and Jonah. They're both about league average offensive players. And when those 2 got hot at the bottom of your lineup, then at times you had, 5 great hitters and 4 pretty good ones. And at worst, you would only have, 2 bad hitters really at any point in time in last year's lineup. That was what made them so special. But this year, I mean, you didn't have the top tier special level offense from multiple guys. You had just kind of okay to middling to piddling offense from basically everyone up and down this lineup. I mean, even Marcus Semien, was a league average by OPS plus this year. Barely got there, and still just 1 point shy of a 700 OPS for the season. That's not what he was hoping for. That's not what almost all of these guys are hoping for. Now, what's hopefully going to be different next year is that this is going to be a significantly longer layoff, longer offseason, more time to rest and to get healthy than they had last year. They're not going to have Corey Seager rehabbing at the big league level, hopefully, once they get to at the start of the regular season like he was this year for the first month and a half or so. But still, this was a massive fall off and has got to be the number one, not the only reason why this team failed to achieve their goals in 2024, but it is definitely the biggest problem. Coming up, we're going to look at some other things that contributed to this fall off, to this disappointing season, right after this word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Rangers is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. It's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Other baseball cities or other cities without baseball. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. Maybe it's time to taste your baseball competition stadium cuisine. Luckily, on Booking.com, you can find the stadium stay that's just right for you. With Booking.com's wide variety of choices across the U.S., you can go incognito in all your rival city. Booking.com delivers the exact right U.S. stay just for you. They can help you land a stay that's close to your home team or your rival team's stadiums. From hotels that overlook stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices all across the U.S. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your baseball rivals. Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Shout out to the Everydayers for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, I'll be talking about the 5 things that went right for the Rangers in 2024. Now, I'm recording this before Game 2 of all of these wildcard series, so as you're listening, you might be getting to enjoy having watched the Astros been eliminated. Well, I'll talk maybe about that on Friday's show if that ends up happening, but a fun Game 1 of these playoffs, seeing Cole Reagans make his playoff debut and not seeing the Rangers in it. Incredibly frustrating. And one of the reasons for it is reason number 2. The Rangers relied a lot on rookies this year. They just did. They put a lot of faith in 2 very, very young outfielders with a lot of promise, a lot of hype, a lot of reason to be excited about them. But the offensive additions they made this offseason were very, very minimal. Here's the hitters that they signed this offseason. Travis Jankowski, Andrew Kisner. That's it. And both of them had an OPS. Okay, Travis finally did bring it over the line, a 508 OPS on the season. Did end up hitting above the Mendoza line at 200, but still just a 508 OPS from a guy who had to play a lot more than the Rangers anticipated. 104 games, 207 plate appearances from Jankowski's, just the 1 home run, which came on opening day. A majestic shot, an important shot, we thought at the time. But Andrew Kisner, an OPS below 400 is a difficult thing to do for a season. Granted, he only played in 35 games because his offense was just so unplayable. This is supposed to be an offense-first catcher. I mean, the Rangers' bats didn't make any improvements this offseason. They didn't make any signings. They didn't sign a DH because they thought, okay, here's this kid Wyatt Langford, who we think is probably ready, who's going to be our everyday DH. We're going to run back the same offense. It's going to be mostly the same, except Evan Carter is going to be the upgrade in left field, the first, regular left fielder, above average left fielder the Rangers were hoping to have had for a full season since basically 2019 Willie Calhoun. It's been a long time since they've had even a half-decent player as an everyday left fielder. And that ended up not being the case. I mean, you look at the overall season numbers, and this is not to ding Wyatt Langford. Overall, he finished off with a solid season. The 3.9 Baseball Reference 4 season for Wyatt Langford is a good year. It was. But only getting 45 games of Evan Carter, a 633 OPS in those 45 games, and just waiting for most of the season to figure out when or if he was going to come back, and he didn't. The Rangers got basically a third of the season from him. And for the whole first half, for most of the season, Wyatt Langford was struggling offensively, and the Rangers were hoping that he would be their second best hitter behind Corey Seager. That's a lot of unfair expectations to put on a kid who's 22 years old, who spent 200 plate appearances in the minors before making his big league debut because he was just so gosh darn good there. In the first half, he had a 702 OPS in 72 games, Wyatt Langford. In the second half, he was significantly better, a 784 OPS for that second half, including an absolutely red-hot September and October where he won AL Player of the Month and Rookie of the Month. Not just the Rookie of the Month in September, but the best player in the American League. All these other teams in big pennant chases, guys like Aaron Judge, who's having a phenomenal MVP season, Bobby Witt Jr., who's having a phenomenal, would normally be an MVP level season had Aaron Judge not done what he had done all year. Juan Soto in the midst of a playoff chase. All three of those guys, phenomenally talented hitters, but Wyatt Langford had a better month than them. 26 games, a 996 OPS, 8 home runs, literally doubled his home run total for the season in a month. Sensational. But that was 1 month. That was just 1 month. Outside of his Rookie of the Months in June and September, he never had a month where he had an OPS above 650. That's how much he struggled in those other months. May, you can only count so much because it was literally just 6 games. But, after coming off of that hamstring injury that put him on the shelf for about 2-3 weeks, he was significantly better in June. I thought, okay, this is it. This is Wyatt Langford. This is him turning it on. But in the month of July and August, he was rough. Hit 217 in July, hit 215 in August, a sub 300 on base in July as well. Just did not look like that same electric rookie that we had seen in the month of June. He had some phenomenal moments this year. He had a boatload of them, a walk-off grand slam, an inside the park home run, a cycle, another walk-off hit. The guy was incredibly clutch. And still, I think next year and in the future, the ceiling is incredibly bright for this kid. But expecting all of those guys who had what might have been career years in 2023 to come back and do the exact same thing, I didn't think it was that unreasonable, but they could have added 1 or 2 more bats. It ended up being the primary DH this year was Robbie Grossman, which Robbie Grossman did his job. He did. He hit lefties okay, put together good at-bats, and as frustrating as it was at times, he did his job. But the rest of this offense, it's hard to predict something like this significant level of fall off from basically every single position. But the Rangers said, no, we're going to be better because of Wyatt Langford and because of Evan Carter. And Carter was still a mystery. He's still a mystery at this point. There's something that he thinks he's figured out and hopes that things are better with his back next year, but we're still not sure about how he's going to hit lefties in the big leagues in his career, how healthy he's going to be able to be with these multiple back injuries that have taken huge chunks of his first 4 professional seasons. It's worrisome, for sure. But the Rangers are looking like a lot of their upgrades for next year, they're hoping that they're just internal, which might work out better next year, and I think Wyatt Langford is going to have a significantly better year next year than he did this year. But still, a large reason why they weren't able to sustain the success of last year is because they said, nope, we don't need to go sign any vets. We don't need to go sign any other players in terms of hitters. We can sign a pitcher or 2 in the bullpen. But Wyatt Langford and Evan Carter will fix everything that was wrong with this offense. Not that there was much wrong with this offense in 2023, and that ended up being not necessarily the biggest reason for failure, but definitely, I think, was a contributing factor. Coming up, we're going to talk about I think the second biggest reason why this team wasn't able to repeat as champs or even make the playoffs the year after they won the World Series. Right after this word from our sponsors. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Look at some other teams winning their championships in the DFW area right now. The Stars, as we speak, are the 5th favorite to win the Stanley Cup in 2025, plus 1,100 right now. The favorites are the Edmonton Oilers at plus 850. If you're thinking that Luka Doncic and crew are going to get it done and win Luka's first finals as a member of the Mavs right now, tied for the 6th best odds with the Denver Nuggets at plus 1,100. So go check out all the odds on FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. This show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best way to get real money on the sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. All you do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot of win to up to 100 times your money. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. So go download the app and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Now, the number 3 thing that went wrong for the Rangers in 2024 was the cavalry. Now, this whole season, it seemed like it was looking like, for me, the most important storyline heading into the season was just, can this team hang on? Can the starting pitching hold up enough, be healthy enough to keep this team in the race until those big 3 that were on the IL, supposed to be for most of the season, until they came back and gave the Rangers some reinforcements in the rotation? Well, the cavalry came back, and it didn't do all that much good. Max Scherzer gave the Rangers 9 starts, 43 in a third innings, a just barely below 4 ERA. In fact, those big 3 of Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, Tyler Mahle, they combined for 15 starts, 66 and 2/3 innings, and a 3.78 ERA. That's not what the Rangers were hoping for. The Rangers were hoping to get Max Scherzer back sometime in June, so that would be about half a season. Conservatively, maybe 2/3 of a season, if you were being generous. And with how things started to look at his rehab, things were looking up. Things were looking like, okay, they're going to get a half-decent version of Scherzer for most of this year, and that's going to be very, very helpful in this rotation. Wasn't the case. That second IL stint basically took out the entire rest of his season right around the trade deadline, basically right before that trade deadline. Came back and made 1 start and looked fine in Seattle, and that was it. That was it for Max Scherzer as a member of the Texas Rangers, probably. I don't see a scenario where the Rangers sign him back in free agency, but the other guy who they were expecting at least a little bit more, probably a lot more than they got from him, was Tyler Mahle. I mean, only 3 starts, averaging basically just over 4 innings per start, and an ERA just south of 5. Had that one pretty darn good start against the Astros in his first time out, but the other 2 were not so great. And then after that third start where he looked horrendous, the velocity was way down, the control was not what we were expecting it to be, not looking like Tyler Mahle. He went on the IL with shoulder fatigue, and that was it for his season. 3 starts, basically 12 innings, 13 innings, if you're being generous and giving him an extra out. Not what the Rangers were hoping for. And then Jacob deGrom, about 3 innings, 1.69 ERA in 10 and 2/3 innings. That's not that much less than the Rangers were expecting from him. I mean, coming back when he did, if the Rangers were in it, maybe he would have cut his rehab a little bit shorter. Would have had 4 or maybe 5 starts at the big league level. But he'd only be going 2, maybe 3 innings in those starts. So, I mean, overall, the rest of this pitching staff, for the most part, did his job in just staying healthy. The Rangers got 32 outings from Andrew Heaney, 160 innings on the dot. They got 29 starts from Nathan Eovaldi, sub 4 ERA, a little bit better than league average, 170 2/3 innings. This is the first time that the Texas Rangers have had 2 starting pitchers both go 160 innings or more in 5 years. 5 years! The Rangers haven't had two guys go 160, not even 200, not 180, not 170, but 160 innings. This is the first time they've done that since 2019, the dueling aces of Mike Minor and Lance Lynn. And they got that from Nathan Eovaldi and Andrew Heaney. Now, the rest of this rotation didn't really hold up like the Rangers were hoping. John Gray had a 4.5 ERA in 19 starts and 23 outings in total, just barely over 100 innings. They got 101 innings from Michael Lorenzen, who did his job, but then was jettisoned at the trade deadline because it was deemed that the Rangers had, plenty of starting pitching. Ended up not being the case. Dane Dunning had a terrible season, a ERA north of 5, after being the Rangers' most important pitcher for the span of that regular season in 2023. He was amazing, phenomenal, but really came back down to earth this year. The walks were a big problem. The home runs were a big problem. The BABIP was BABIPing him to death. And only getting 13 starts out of Cody Bradford, the Rangers needed more of that because he was their most effective starter for the time that he was starting. An ERA around 3 in those 13 starts and just over 75 innings. The Rangers starting pitchers that were not those big three, that were not expected to be all-stars. I mean, Eovaldi was expected to be probably borderline all-star like he was the year before. Those guys did their job. Unfortunately, the big three of Scherzer and Mahle and deGrom, I should probably just say Scherzer and Mahle because deGrom, that's about what you were expecting, but getting basically nothing out of Mahle, I think, is almost more frustrating than only getting the 9 starts and 40-something innings out of Scherzer. Scherzer was about what they expected, a little bit fewer starts, a little bit less healthy, but that's kind of what you get when a guy has, 1,500 career innings on his arm. But the Rangers weren't able to hold up in the rotation for those reinforcements, and even though those guys did get back by the time they were there, it didn't really end up mattering. Now, the number 4 thing that went wrong for these Rangers this season was basically every high leverage relief option outside of, obviously, the big two in Kirby Yates and David Robertson. The Rangers bullpen last year was an absolute disaster during the regular season, and until they got to the postseason, when Jose Leclerc and Josh Boras had the best month that they've ever pitched in their entire lives, maybe ever will, even if that is the case, they were still shaky at times, for a lot of times, in the regular season. But the Rangers brought in Yates and Robertson and said, okay, well, enough of, Leclerc and Spores and whoever else we got back there, they'll be fine enough. John Hernandez, maybe that'll be fine enough. But that wasn't the case. Leclerc had a disastrous start to the season, was better down the stretch, but still not great for the whole year. Latz had some moments, but still, I'm not entirely sold on a guy with a 5.5 walks per 9 rate moving forward. In his age 28 season, he had some moments of brilliance, some moments of not so brilliance, and this will lead us into the next thing that went wrong for the Rangers, was the trade deadline. The number 5 thing that went wrong for the Rangers was the trade deadline. In basically every facet of it. The Rangers were not quite out of it, not quite into it. They halfway bought, and the guys who they traded for, even though they didn't give up really that much in terms of what I thought it would cost to get guys who were decent trade chips in Andrew Chafin, and also what they got in terms of their backup catcher, who ended up performing a little bit better than their starting catcher at that point in Carson Kelly. Kelly had a 634 OPS, and that was better than what Jonah Heim was doing for the season, but still not what the Rangers were hoping for. Kelly was significantly better in Detroit, as was Andrew Chafin, who was just an unmitigated disaster with the Rangers. 21 outings, so many of them it felt like he just could not find the strike zone. 15 walks in 19 and a third innings. Did strike out quite a few in 20, more than a strikeout per inning, but still, the walks and the home runs as well. I mean, just back-breaking 3-run homers and so many wild pitches. I've never seen a pitcher with that many wild pitches. Part of it because his slider is so nasty. It drops off so much that it's usually in the dirt and getting a lot of swings and misses. But if the hitters recognize that slider, they just let it go in the dirt 4 times and take their base. And that happened pretty frequently. I'm not blaming Chris Young for going for it. I've said at the time to go for it, and I still stand by that was the right move. But the way that it played out, I mean, it felt like the Angels last year, who had this big moment of we're going for it on the trade deadline. We're, pushing all our chips in. This is going to be the final year that we have Shohei Ohtani, and maybe we get Mike Trout back at some point, and we're going to push all our chips in. And then they immediately went on a massive, massive losing streak, and were out of it basically 2 weeks after they just made those all-in trades. And while the Rangers didn't go on a 7-game losing streak immediately after the trade deadline, they really just fell right off a cliff right after that trade deadline, because by the time it was mid-August, that was when I pronounced this team dead and their playoff hopes just absolutely dead. I mean, they were an above 500 team in the month of July, but they just could not get it done in August for above 500 team in September. But by that point, the Rangers were already out of it. It was already done. And a lot of those wins in August, where they salvaged it from being a horrendous month, they had a series against the White Sox, which for all the Rangers' faults this year, at least they were 6-0 against the worst team I've ever seen in the 2024 Chicago White Sox. That was nice. That was good. But we're not talking about what was good. We're talking about what was bad, which was this team for the vast majority of this season. I mean, not being in a definitive position to be able to make a choice at that trade deadline hurt this team in the long haul. If this team had been a little bit worse heading into that trade deadline, and they were able to move Robertson and Yates, I think it would have been really, really tough to get this team to part with Nathan Eovaldi, especially since they will very desperately want, I think, all three of those guys back in free agency this offseason. It would have been much harder to part ways with Eovaldi at the trade deadline. But if they were completely out of it, the Rangers could have gotten a massive, massive haul for Eovaldi, for, I don't know about massive haul for Yates, but probably a pretty solid return. Same for Robertson. I mean, those three guys are vets who have been in playoff chases, who, well, Yates at least was basically at the peak of his powers. This is about as good as Yates has ever been. And because this team was in such a middling position, unfortunately, they just weren't able to take care of things. One last little thing that they were also very bad at this year was somehow playing on the road. The team that was undefeated in the postseason, and 11-0 to win a World Series. No team's ever done that before. Basically the exact same group of guys. They had an above 500 record at home, 543 winning percentage, 44-37 at home. Pretty solid record. On the road, 34-47, a 420 winning percentage. I don't know what road magic they had. Maybe they needed to eat more hot dogs, or maybe they just needed Mitch Garver back. I don't know what it was. This team was terrible on the road, terrible since the trade deadline, and those are, I'd say, the 5 biggest reasons why the Texas Rangers unfortunately disappointed in 2024. That's going to do it for today's show. Tomorrow I'll be back with a Friday edition talking about a little bit on the brighter spot. 5 things that did go well for Texas in 2024. But that'll do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.